Hey everyone, you might be able to tell I'm really uncomfortable being on camera, but hopefully it'll get better as I go on here. But I've got a story that I really want to tell, and I'm not sure how long it'll take me to tell it, and I might stumble on my words. I'm on the autism spectrum, so words don't always come easily to me unless I have time to write them rather than try to speak them. But I just really want to tell my grandma's story. My grandma she's my father's mother, the one who raised me since I was a year old. And she passed away on April 8th of this year, 2020. And this is just, of course, it was a really hard time in my life, one of the hardest things I've been through. The whole thing leading up to it, it was just horrific. And then with everything else going on in the world at the same time, it was almost like that was hardly relevant, except how it affected the nightmare going on in my life. But I've got my journal to kind of refer to keep me on track with the timeline of how things happen. But my point in making this video isn't to talk about what a tragic story this is, but to talk about how God really showed me how loving He is through this time as I walked through this dark valley. It's where I really learned how loving God is. I believed in God before that, but I just didn't know how personal and loving and gracious He is until I went through this and I had Him by my side and just all the miracles He did. And it wasn't just her death, but this whole thing leading up to it was just a nightmare to me. It started, she went to the hospital, I don't even remember what for. That was on February 15th. And then it was February 21st when she came home. So during that time in the hospital, her legs had gotten really weak and she kept complaining of the pain in her hand. So they did an x-ray and they said, well, nothing's broken, that's just swelling. And I'm thinking to myself, well, don't they wonder why it's swollen? Because her hand was so painful that she couldn't even lean on it to use her walker or anything like she normally would. She was in a wheelchair, but she would use her walker to get to the bathroom and stuff. But she said she called that she was just going to go ahead and come home, and she was going to try to lean on her arm on the walker. And I was so excited she was finally coming home. I really missed her. I live 3 doors down the hall from her, so I was really used to seeing her every day and her being here. But as soon as they brought her home, she could barely stand up to get in the wheelchair, and I was so panicked because I couldn't lift her. I didn't know what to do. I knew as soon as she had to get up to use the bathroom or something, I just didn't know what we were going to do. And it was so late at night. I got her in the recliner where she slept, but it took everything I had. Like, I got hurt kind of just trying to keep her from falling because her legs were so weak that she couldn't even hardly do that. So then once she got in the recliner, I was just really panicked and texting everyone asking for help. And of course no one else knew what to do either, because you call 911 and they're just gonna say, well, nothing's wrong with her. So what do you do? I checked on her around 1 a.m. before I went to sleep, and she was sleeping in the recliner and she had her phone right next to her. And I just prayed that she wouldn't get up and fall. And at the time they had switched the sleeping medication I was on to a different one, so I was having a bad reaction to that in my mood and my mind. And if I if I hadn't had that reaction, it probably would have occurred to me to stay the night with her and make sure she didn't fall, but it didn't. And I mean, in all fairness, no one else suggested that to me either, but I do still carry a lot of guilt for that. I wish I had, but so I just prayed, and I had faith that she would be fine through the night, and in the morning we could figure out what to do. Well, that's not what happened. I woke up to a text from my aunt that my grandma had fallen during the night, and she was on the floor for 5 hours before she was able to reach the phone and get help. And I just felt horrible. I felt so guilty and like it was all my fault, and I could never forgive myself. And sadly, that was kind of the least of my guilt. Worse things ended up happening, but so she went back to the hospital, of course. She didn't break anything, thank God for that. She was on the floor for a long time, so of course she was bruised and stiff, and I just felt awful and like it was all my fault. So well, I don't remember the date when she came back home, but when she was in the hospital, I was still on this medication that was clouding my thinking. It was for insomnia, but it affects serotonin. It blocks it, so it really has an effect on the brain. When you affect neurotransmitters, you affect the brain, especially in someone diagnosed with bipolar disorder. So when she was still in the hospital for this fall, a social worker came in, and I asked if I could ask her something in private, and I just trusted that these people are here to help. And I never expected how this would end up backfiring on me, but she let me go in a room with her, and I mean, this was stupid of me, but I told her that I'm autistic and I don't always know what to do in a situation like the night my grandma fell. I didn't know what to do because I knew she couldn't stand up and I couldn't lift her. And my intention in saying this was just to ask her, if something like this happens again, who should I call? Is there someone I can call for help? That's why I mentioned it, and I felt so guilty about this that I blamed my autism for not knowing what to do, which I do a lot in my life. When something goes wrong, I think, well, this wouldn't happen if I wasn't autistic, which is not always the case. But anyway, that's why I mentioned it, and I thought maybe there would be someone I could call if something like this happened again, when, like, if my grandma's legs got too weak to stand and I was afraid she was gonna fall. So, I mean, all she told me was to call 911 if that happened, which I knew then it wouldn't help, because, I mean, what can they do if that maybe just put someone in a nursing home, which she didn't need. It was just her legs weren't always that weak. It was from being laid up in the hospital all that time. But that was the advice she gave me, and I assumed that conversation was private, so I felt safe. You know, you think these people are here to help you, and that what you tell them is confidential. So anyway, I didn't really think much more of that conversation. So then it was March 14th. My aunt and I thought maybe she had a UTI. She had a catheter and it just looked kind of cloudy, and She was having really bad pain in her legs. She was having a lot of trouble walking, and so we just thought to take her to the hospital, which I had a bad feeling about it, but at the same time, I was still carrying this incredible guilt, and I was thinking, well, if her legs are that weak, if she's in the hospital, at least I don't have to worry about her falling again. But this was kind of towards the beginning of the coronavirus pandemic, and I don't know, I just had a bad feeling about it. I was afraid of her getting sick in the hospital, or I mean, who knows what, with all the panic, and this was when it was really intense. But you know, my guilt kind of won out, so, and my aunt agreed that it was best to get it looked at, because my grandma, she was in stage 3 kidney failure, so an untreated UTI can make things escalate and really go downhill with the kidney disease, and she was doing so good. I didn't want that to happen either, so we took her to the hospital, and turned out he said she didn't have a UTI, but then later they said she did, so I don't know what's up with that, but they did decide to keep her overnight for observation, so I just fully expected that she would be home the next day. I had no idea this drama that was about to unfold, and how everything was going to start to backfire on me. But okay, so the next day I thought she was coming home, but I woke up to a text from my aunt, and she said this nurse just came in and she said, "You're autistic," and she told my grandma that it was selfish of her to expect me to take care of her when I'm autistic. And I was just livid that what I said wasn't private, and that my words were twisted. I never said I was too overwhelmed to take care of her. I never said it was selfish of her to want me to take care of her. I was just so horribly upset, and so this nurse, she's just bullying my grandma, saying that she needs to go to a nursing home, and it's selfish of her to expect her autistic granddaughter to take care of her. And I mean, I just tried to explain what I really meant, and it's just horrific when people twist your words. And first of all, I don't know why a nurse was even told what I told that social worker in confidence, but it was just horrible, because I was trying to help my grandma if that situation ever happened again, and it was totally twisted and backfired on both of us. So then I had this incredible guilt that her life was going to be ruined because of me trying to help her. And I was like, man, if this is what happens when I'm trying to be good, imagine what havoc I could wreak if I was trying to do bad. But anyway, well, this went on for quite a while with her at the hospital, and then with the pandemic and stuff, it got to be so that they were allowing one visitor a day. So I got to see her maybe the first day, and I just told her that I wasn't going to allow her to be put in a nursing home. As long as I was alive, I would always make sure she was taken care of. But then it got to where they could only have one visitor per day, and plus they had to designate who it was going to be. So she picked my aunt, which is, I mean, she's her medical power of attorney, so that was understandable that she chose her. But then I get a phone call that this went on for a while, just kind of back and forth whether she was coming home or, well, first she decided she would go to the nursing home permanently, and it seemed like I talked her out of that, and then she was going to go for rehab, which, I mean, I was okay with that, but I was afraid of the nursing home locking down and then she wouldn't get to come home, but it was better than going permanently, so I was kind of okay with that. I mean, well, honestly, I was doing horribly. I wasn't okay with any of it, but I mean, if she could come home, I had that hope. But then on March 19th, then I get the phone call, and she said I had bad news, and I said, what is it? And she said that she wasn't coming home ever, and I just kind of went crazy, crying and begging her and just insisting that I was going to come down there and pick her up, and that I didn't care what I had to sacrifice or what I had to give up, that I was going to take care of her. And she just kept saying no, that she said she was being forced into it, which I knew legally you can't force a person into a nursing home. I tried to tell her this, but my aunt explained to me that the way this nurse was bullying her, this nurse was also threatening to get adult protective services involved, and that I knew my diagnosis of autism was going to work against me, that they could say I wasn't qualified to take care of her, which I felt really guilty and really bad for that, because a lot of times I got overwhelmed and I said that I wasn't qualified to take care of her, but it wasn't that I meant that all the time. It was just certain times, and it was when she was able to do most of her care for herself, and it was never that it was between her being home or being in a nursing home. I mean, when it came down to it, I would do anything to help her be able to be home. So anyway, that decision was made that she was, I mean, we felt like if she came home that this nurse was going to call Adult Protective Services, and if they said she couldn't live on her own, then she would be forced into a nursing home and she wouldn't get to pick which one it was, and we would never be able to get her home. It would just be really bad, so at least this way she got to pick where she went. So I mean, I kind of tried to make peace with that and be okay with it. So it was around 12:20 a.m. on March 21st when she went. It was the first time I saw her in about a week because I couldn't go to the hospital, so we, as a family, we went to the hospital so we could be there when they wheeled her into the ambulance to go to the nursing home. And we knew it would be the last time a lot of us saw her for a long time, and maybe ever, if she died in the nursing home because they weren't allowing visitors. So we all got there. I don't know what time it was. So we got there. We were there a long time. I think my dad and I might have gotten there around 7 p.m. So yeah, it was 12:20 a.m. when they brought her out, and trying not to cry, but at least the train is kind of distracting me. Sorry about that noise. I'm sure it's coming through on the video. Yeah, I was the first one to see her when they brought her out on the gurney to load her into the ambulance, and she just looked so good. She looked really healthy and she looked really good, and she was smiling and waving and blowing us it just really touched me that that's the kind of person she was, that even when she never wanted to go to a nursing home, and even when she was on her way there, she was still smiling and blowing kisses, and she wasn't like crying and everything like I was, like I still do, thinking about it. So I just really hoped that she would like it there, and I was hoping that I could get her apartment, to live in her apartment, because I live 3 doors down, but I don't know, it might seem silly to some people, but for her too, if I got it, then she felt like she wasn't really giving up her apartment, that it was still hers in a way. So I got the paper, but something told me not to tell them she was going to the nursing home permanently, so I didn't. I just said we hoped it was just going to be for rehab, but I wanted to have the paper to start the process in case she did go there permanently, so that maybe I could get this apartment. And the only way to do that was to get it as a medical accommodation, because she has a balcony and I didn't. So they gave me the papers, and there was a paper where she would have to sign away the apartment and say she wasn't coming back. So I was going to take it that night for her to sign, but I didn't. For some reason, something just told me not to, and so I really hoped she would like it at that nursing home. And then that day, on the 21st, I came down to her apartment, and I was gonna start cleaning it out, because we would have to get rid of her stuff, and I started to text my cousin to ask her like what stuff she would want, because I was gonna start getting rid of it, but again, I didn't know what it was. Something just told me not to, so I just saved the text in my drafts and I never sent it. And I just didn't really know what this feeling was holding me back, because I knew she wasn't coming back, and I just figured it was wishful thinking or something. And I was kind of okay with her being at the nursing home. I thought maybe she would really like it, and after her quarantine period was over, I was hoping she would make friends, and I knew she'd be well taken care of. Well, I thought so. So, well, what happened next? Okay, well, actually it was, I guess, well, I've got the dates on here all wrong, but I think it was on the 22nd when she called, and maybe it was March 21st or 22nd, she called me, and she was crying, and she just said how much she hated it there. She said it was way too hot, and she couldn't even sleep. She could barely breathe. The food was horrible, and they didn't give her enough to eat. They just gave real tiny portions, and she didn't even have a call light in there. They had my grandma was really clever. They had a cord clear across the room that she couldn't even reach, but I had packed this back scratcher for her that she used to always use to reach stuff she dropped. So she used that back scratcher and got a hold of that cord and tied it to the handle of her purse, so she could at least tug on her purse if she needed the call light. But I don't know we were never allowed to visit, so I don't know what was up with her room, but her room didn't even have a bathroom. It just had a bedside commode, and so like they would get her on that commode, and it would be hours before they came back to get her off, and if she pulled the cord, they would come and they'd say, well, I'll be back in just a minute, and then it'd be hours before they came, and it'd be someone different who finally came. That one never came back. So, I mean, she hated it, and this was awful. So then I lost my peace. I felt horrible again, and just so desperate, and I just spent all day trying to think of any solution. So that night, I don't know why I ever thought of this. They had suggested for a long time that my grandma have hospice care, and she never wanted it. But this time, she had said she would rather die tomorrow and be home than live in this place for a year. And her health was really going downhill anyway. Her heart rate become really variable, really low at times, which is something that tends to happen during the last few months of life. I didn't know that at the time, but so I just called hospice. It was like 2 o'clock in the morning. I was really surprised anyone answered, and I talked to this nurse, and I said, if someone is on hospice, do they ever have to go to a nursing home if it ends up that they can't walk or something? And she said, well, no, if they can't walk, we've got standing lifts, or we even have a full Hoyer lift, but no one ever has to go to a nursing home just because they can't walk. It would be for other health reasons, or if you just can't take care of them at home anymore. So I had this hope. I texted my aunt about it, but I kind of thought that I thought I wasn't going to really be able to get anyone on board with this idea, and I didn't have much hope of this working, but I told my aunt all about it, and she was like, that sounds promising, doesn't it? And so we were gonna have a family meeting and meet with them and ask questions, but as soon as my grandma heard that there was a possibility of coming home, she was ready to sign up. We didn't need to have the family meeting, and she was in her right mind, so I really wanted it to be her decision, and I just didn't think things would happen so fast. And it was really a miracle that I ever thought of that, and that I called them, and it was just really amazing. So then on March 23rd, everything was happening so fast, and I had been praying non-stop. I was so depressed. I couldn't even eat or sleep or anything. If I tried to eat, there was just such a lump in my throat that I couldn't even swallow, so I really couldn't do anything. I was so depressed that I would just walk around and just pray for answers to get her home, because I really was afraid she would die in the nursing home and we would never see her again, and she would be all alone, and I knew she hated it there, and I just kept praying for answers. So on March 23rd, I looked out the window, and there was a tree right outside my window, and this sounds crazy, but there was this great big giant eagle sitting on the branch of that tree looking in the window at me, and I had never seen such a thing. I think it was a golden eagle. It wasn't a bald eagle. I know that because I looked up pictures, but this eagle was so big, the branch was bending under it, and I thought it was going to break the tree branch. And after all my prayer, this just seemed like a sign that everything was going to be okay. I wrote about that. my grandma just had her heart set on coming home. So she didn't get to come home that day, but I have on here the day well, I had started to pack up her stuff in her apartment to get rid of it. I didn't get rid of anything, but I was sorting through it and putting things in different piles. But when this was all set into motion, it still seemed like a long shot, for her to qualify for hospice and for them to say she could come home. And there were some people in the family that thought she was better off being in the nursing home during the pandemic, but it wasn't a sure thing, and I was still very distressed and unsure. But this night I started to, all the stuff that I had packed up and sorted, I started to unpack it and put everything back where it belonged. And I had nothing else to do because I was just so depressed that I was so restless. I couldn't do hardly anything but stay active. So I literally cleaned her whole apartment and dusted everything, unpacked everything, put stuff back up on the walls that I had taken down. And I was doing it in faith that God was going to answer my prayers and get her home. It wasn't a sure thing, and it seemed very uncertain, but I just decided to show my faith. And that night when I was done, I just walked around praying to God, and I just kept saying, God, this is how much I trust you. This is how much I believe you're going to answer this prayer. And I even made ice and put it in her freezer and put her pop in the refrigerator to get cold and everything. And I was walking around crying and praying and just telling God, this is my faith. This is how much I trust you. I cleaned all day. I unpacked this whole apartment, and it would have been all for nothing if this didn't work out. It would have been a lot of work for nothing, that's for sure, because it was a lot of work. She had just had a new floor put in, and I even had to move furniture back where it belonged from where we had moved it for them to put this floor in. And that was my faith, that I trusted God enough to answer my prayer, that I did all that work, and I just had faith that it wasn't going to be for nothing. So, I was just so desperate for God to answer this prayer, and I was really powerless. On my own, I was so powerless to get her home, and it was something that I so desperately wanted, not just for me, but for her. And when I got home, I don't normally do this, but I literally got on my knees and just cried and prayed for God to make this happen, because there was really nothing more I could do to make this happen. So I did that, and I put in here where I prayed that God would give us at least a few more months of memories, but I would love even so much more than that. And I praised Him for a second chance, because I had the guilt of just feeling like I hadn't helped her enough. I did visit her every day, and I made meals for both of us, and I did a lot for her, but at the same time I was trying to keep my own life in order and trying to kind of have a life of my own. So there were times when I had to say no to certain things or try to get someone else to help, but I felt guilty for that. So I just felt like I wanted God to give me the second chance to really spend more time with her and help her. So then on March 24th, I wrote, God did the miracle. Mom came home. I called her Mom because she was the one who raised me. And I was just so happy. It was pretty early in the day when she got home, and I was just so happy. I couldn't believe that it really happened. It's during the pandemic. It just seemed impossible. It was impossible. Well, you know, a lot of things were impossible. Just for her to be in this nursing home out of town and not to be able to go visit her and to try to get her home. Hospice arranged the transportation, and I just couldn't believe she was home. I was so happy, and she was so hungry and thirsty that she chugged 2 diet ginger ales, and she ate a whole Hungry Man dinner, and then she ate 6 prunes. And just because she was so hungry, they didn't feed them hardly anything, and what they did feed them, it was horrible. And she just kept saying how good it was to be home. And so in order for hospice to approve of her being home, I had to actually move in with her, which was really hard for me, but to me there was no other choice. It wasn't an option to have her in the nursing home that she hated. So I was just willing to do anything, but it doesn't mean it was easy just because you're willing to do it. And especially for someone on the autism spectrum, to be away from your home and your routine and just to take care of someone, it's really difficult. I mean, it's hard for me to take care of myself, and then to take care of her. I mean, it wasn't that hard at first to take care of her, but it still required a lot of time, and I was very sleep deprived all the time because seemed like I would always put my phone on silent when I was sleeping at home, but here it wasn't like that. You know, at my grandma's, seemed like every day around 7 a.m. the phone would start ringing, and just kept ringing all day long. She was very well loved, but then also we had the hospice nurses and aides coming every day, and they would come early in the morning, and I'm more of a night owl, more of like a 2 a.m. to noon sleeper, honestly. But there was none of that taking care of her. And I would try to go to sleep at a decent time, but she wasn't like that. She was more of a person who would just sleep a few hours at a time all throughout the day and night. It's like she never slept for any long span of time. So I was just very sleep deprived, and it was really hard, and kind of panicked at what I had gotten myself into because I knew I couldn't do it. I knew I just couldn't do it for very long, but at the same time I was so glad she was home. It was so worth it, and I would never take it back, and at the time I wouldn't have either. I never would have wanted her to go back to the nursing home just because of how hard it was for me. I was still so happy, and so we had all these really good days together, and wouldn't have happened without God answering those prayers. And I just tried to really spoil her and let her live like a queen. Like anything she wanted to eat, I would get for her. Like every meal I made, pretty much I asked what she was hungry for and played games with her, and she loved playing card games and board games. That was her favorite thing. But aside from the work of taking care of her being hard, it was hard to be around her all the time and to see the pain she was in, and like to constantly hear her breathing. She was having trouble breathing, and it was really draining to see someone you love be in that kind of pain all the time. And I guess that's why a while before that, it was just really hard for me to be around her, because I was trying to block that out. I didn't want to think about her mortality or her condition going downhill. It's like I kind of wanted to run away from it, and I regret that now, because it kind of robbed me of some time with her that I could have had more of. But I still saw her every day, but then I would just get really uncomfortable with that and want to run away from it. So I guess so I could tell myself that it wasn't happening if it's kind of like an out of sight, out of mind thing. But when I had to live with her and take care of her, then I was just kind of forced to face this every day. I couldn't run away from it anymore, and just had to accept it. But I'm really thankful that we had the time together, and I never thought I would be able to take care of her, but God really put it on my heart, and then when He made it happen, I just knew He was going to give me the strength to do it, and He did every day. And my grandma, whenever she was on the phone, she was bragging to people about what good care of her I was taking, and even my family, they were really impressed with it. I think I really rose above everyone's expectations of me and of what they thought I was capable of, and even what I thought I was capable of. I just thought I couldn't do it, but God is the one who gave me the strength to do it, and it was hard. I can see so many places where I feel like if I had done something different, maybe she would have lived longer. But I'm really glad she was home. So, well, the day came, she had an incident. Like, I had gotten in bed to try to sleep, but she wasn't ready yet. She'd be up like all night, and I just couldn't do that and then be awake all day taking care of her too. But then I got up for something, and she was trying to get in the recliner, and she was able to, at this point, she was able to stand and transfer, but her catheter, the tube, it got caught around her wheelchair wheel, and it pulled, but it didn't come out, so I didn't think much of it since it didn't come out. And she kept saying how much it hurt, and she was having spasms, and I just thought it was because it had gotten pulled. You know, I didn't feel real alarmed about it since it didn't come out, and I didn't really know what to do. I knew hospice had a 24-hour number, and I felt urged to call that number, but then I was like, well, man, if I don't get to sleep now, I'm not gonna get hardly any sleep before the aides start coming and everything in the morning. Looking back, I feel like I was being really selfish, but at the same time, I didn't think a nurse was gonna come out then anyway. This was like maybe 3 o'clock in the morning. I should have called. I wish I had called right away, but I can't take that back now. But I guess all during the night then she was having those spasms. It was about 8 o'clock in the morning when a nurse came then, and she told the nurse about it. And the nurse said that probably the balloon had got pulled into the urethra, and of course the nurse didn't help my feelings of guilt any. She said that I should have called right away, and that since I didn't call right away, then it had been in there all night and probably caused swelling and everything in there, which I didn't know. I mean, I don't know anything about catheters, and I didn't really even know about there being a balloon on it that could possibly be pulled into the urethra. But I do still feel guilty about that. I wish I had called right away, but I didn't. I didn't think they would come until the morning anyway, even if I called, but anyway, that was kind of where things started to go downhill, because ever since that happened, then she had very little urine in the catheter, and then it was mostly blood, and it wasn't like that before. It looked really good before, and I had to empty the bag several times a day. And I just kept trying to tell them that this wasn't normal for her, that it wasn't normal for her to have that little in the bag and for it to be bloody, but it's like they didn't really listen. And if you don't already know, I'm not speaking bad about hospice, but their goal is not to prolong life at all for any reason. They're not trying to make a person live longer. They're trying to make them comfortable in the time they have left. So this really wasn't a priority for most of them. And then the one day, it's March 30th, she still had this going on with the bloody stuff in the bag, and not much at all like it used to be. And then that day she had a fever. It was 102.7, and I was just very upset. I was upset that this whole time I couldn't get anyone to really address this being a problem. They just they just didn't seem real concerned about it. The one nurse, there was one nurse that was really nice, and she really tried repositioning the catheter, and there was another nurse that put a new one in, and there were a few of them that were trying to help, but then there were other nurses that worked for them, and it's more like they're just waiting for the person to die, and they're not concerned about helping at all. But that day, the nurse she had that day is one of those who is just not concerned about these things. And I'm not making this up, because she called the doctor, and by the way, this doctor never saw my grandma, not once. But so this nurse that day, she called the doctor, and she was like, "Yeah, honestly, I'm not concerned about the blood in the bag. I'm only concerned about her pain and her breathing." And then the doctor, without ever seeing my grandma, she said that the blood in the catheter bag had nothing to do with the fever. And the nurse was like, "Oh yeah, that's what I thought. It's just normal end of life stuff." To me, it was very obvious that it was a UTI with the fever and the blood in the catheter bag. And I'm not even a nurse or any kind of medical expert, but they insisted that it wasn't. And so this nurse, she just told me that my grandma was at the last 2 weeks of life, and this is just what happens. It's normal. It's not a UTI. One had nothing to do with the other. So I was just crying a lot that day, and told different people in the family. And my grandma, with the fever, she was kind of confused and delirious. And man, all day I just agonized over what to do, because I knew it wasn't right. I knew she had a UTI and it needed treated, but I felt like with her being on hospice that I couldn't take her to the hospital. I thought that was against the rules, for one thing, and for another thing, I was afraid of that bully nurse being there and like trying to get her taken away from home again. So I tried to call her kidney doctor, and I looked up the number for the urgent care, but they were closed, and I texted everyone I could think of, and the only answer I got was to call Stein. But I called them several times that day, and there was a nurse that was supposed to come in the evening, but by that evening my grandma started vomiting really bad, and I was just thinking, the way she was vomiting and all the blood in the catheter bag, I was just thinking, well, this is it. She's gonna die right now. It just seemed like it. And I said, do you want me to call 911? Because she just had this horrified look on her face, like she thought she was gonna die too. And she said no, but then she just couldn't stop vomiting, and she said call 911. So I did, because there was no way I was just gonna stand there and watch her die and not call 911 when she wanted me to. So I did, and I said, I don't know if you can do anything for her. I don't think she wants to go to the hospital, but she said, I want to go to the hospital. So she really didn't want to die. So they took her to the hospital, and it was so hard because I couldn't be there. That by that point, no one was allowed to visit in the hospitals. And I just stayed up, and I called, and they said they were going to transfer her to another hospital, that Magruder wouldn't accept her as a patient, which I don't know why. To this day, I don't know why, but so I just kept waiting for news. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't really do anything, and I just waited and prayed, and finally around, I think it was around 4 a.m., the nurse called and said they were transferring her to Toledo Hospital, which is about close to an hour from here. There's no way I could get there. And I said, I don't know what will happen next, but I just pray for God's intervention if anything can be done. I couldn't just let her die of something that I believed was very treatable. So that was on March 30th. And by this time it had gotten really hard for me to sleep, because there have been so many times when I had gone to sleep, and when I woke up I had a text message of just this horrible news. And this was another one of those times. I went with my grandma gone at the hospital. I shouldn't have done this, but I put my phone on silent because I just really desperately needed some sleep, and it was like 4 o'clock in the morning anyway when I got to sleep. And with her gone, I wasn't going to be woken up several times during the night, but I shouldn't have done that. But anyway, this was another time I woke up to the most horrible news ever. I woke up to the news that it was too late. She was in septic shock from the UTI, and there's nothing more they could do. And even with the most aggressive treatment, she wasn't going to make it through the night. And it was just devastating, because the only thing she wanted was to be home and here she was far away in this hospital, and it was something that could have been prevented. It was just a UTI, and I tried for days to get anyone to pay attention and to treat this, and here she was just gonna die alone in this hospital. But thankfully, only because it was an end-of-life situation, they allowed one visitor, so that was my aunt, which made sense, because not just because she's the medical power of attorney, but also because I can't drive that far with my autism and stimulation issues and everything, and I just get real confused driving in heavy traffic. So it was only because it was an end-of-life situation that my aunt was allowed to go there and visit her, and I'm really glad she did, because my aunt wanted it. Since our family couldn't be there with her, my aunt wanted to make it so my grandma could come home and we could all be with her. And this is just another thing that seemed impossible, because since my grandma went out of town to this hospital, then she was out of hospice's jurisdiction. So they signed her off as a patient. She was no longer their patient, so they couldn't get her home. So it turned out my aunt, she was really amazing. She got my grandma signed on with a different hospice company that did have jurisdiction there, and she got them to transport her home, and then my grandma got signed back on with the hospice she was with originally. But this was a very uncertain thing too, of whether she was going to get home before she passed away, because her white cell count was over 50,000, and she had been in kidney failure, for years, and then she has sepsis from this UTI, and people just go downhill really fast once they're in septic shock. And with a white cell count that high, and they said she wouldn't make it through the night, so this was like a race against time, and it was really uncertain whether they could get her home, whether we would get to see her one more time. My aunt and uncle and cousins came, my dad came, and my other aunt was with her, but we were just all here waiting and just hoping she would get home, and that she wouldn't pass away before she got home or on the way home. And I just felt so guilty. I wished I had called 911 sooner, but looking back, I think it was too late by the time she even had the fever. I don't know, but I just felt so guilty. But I really hoped she would come home. So then it was really late when she did, and we got the text from my aunt that she was gonna be on her way. So my aunt drove and came here, and then I think the ambulance actually no, they didn't have sirens going, but I think my uncle was standing out on her balcony and he saw the ambulance coming. And I'm trying not to cry at this memory, because it just shows how much she was loved. That when the ambulance came, she had like all these people standing out on her balcony waving at her and cheering at her being home. So it was just, she's very well loved, and it was just amazing to see her come home again, that God brought her home again. And to get anyone home from anywhere during this pandemic, it was just like impossible. So it was really amazing that God got her home again, and she looks so good. Most people I've known who went into septic shock were unconscious and just not doing very well, but she looked so good, and she was conscious, and she was laughing and joking. And it was just really amazing. We were all here with her, and time went on, and they said she was going to pass away that night, but she didn't. I have written here, they said she would pass away today. It's 10:50 and she's still here. I hope she'll be here for my birthday. I'm really happy that she's here. She didn't die that night like they said she would. And that was March 30th, and my birthday was going to be April 4th. And she kept saying she didn't think she would be here for my birthday, and it seemed really unlikely that she would. But my cousin had come, and she wanted to stay the night with her and have one last visit with her, so she ended up coming on April 1st, and it was just a really good time because I had been so depressed and kind of drained, and with my cousin here, we were all three of us, my grandma too, we were all laughing and joking, and it really lightened the mood having my cousin here, and I'm really glad that she got that last chance to be with her. And my cousin stayed the night, so I actually got to go sleep at home, and I was really afraid of a bad text that she had passed away or something, but that didn't happen. And I guess when I went home to go to bed, my grandma kept my cousin up till 3 o'clock in the morning, just telling her stories, and she kept telling her to always treasure her parents. And my grandma, it was kind of funny, my grandma said that my cousin was special, and I said, well, what am I, chopped liver? And my grandma said, no, you're chop suey. And for the rest of the night, she kept calling me chop suey, and it's like they were roasting me. It was really funny. We had a lot of laughs. And my grandma, she had really got her appetite back. She was just wanting all this stuff to eat, which I thought she was getting better because of how her appetite came back and her fever went away. And I just really thought she was making a comeback, and she was, but wouldn't last for long. Well, on April 2nd, my grandma said I made the best scrambled eggs she ever tasted, and she really ate a lot and really enjoyed it, and just a lot of good memories. So she was supposed to pass away on March 30th, April 1st, April 2nd, April 3rd, she's still alive. Then April 4th came, which was my birthday, and she was still alive, and I was so glad. But on that day, she just kept saying she could feel her body slowing down, and I was like, well, you better not die on my birthday, and she said she was trying not to, and she wanted to call different people that day. She just felt like she was gonna go to sleep and never wake up, she said, but I kind of thought it was just from the pain medicine, and I was like, oh, that pain medicine just makes her feel slowed down. It's nothing. I didn't believe her. I thought it was just from that, but she called different people because she was afraid she was gonna die that day. She even had me call my aunt to come over, but in a way it was nice to have my dad and my aunt and my grandma here, and my grandma ate pizza with me on my birthday, and my grandma later, this is silly, but I was upset because the only thing I wanted for my birthday was to take a walk on the beach, because I hadn't really done that since the winter, and my grandma called my dad and told him to come over and stay with her so I could go do that. So that was really special, and it was just like the perfect birthday, having my dad and my aunt here, my grandma still alive, and I got to take my walk on the beach, and we played a card game together that she liked that night, and I was getting a much higher score than her, and she said, "Hey, that's enough, you're killing me," and it just seemed really ironic and weird to me, because I was thinking I'm not the one that's killing you. But then April 5th came, and she ate this Power Bowl steak from Taco Bell. Steak Power Bowl from Taco Bell, and she really loved it, and my dad got it for her, and she told us that she kept wondering what her last meal was gonna be. And I said, well, we're just gonna make sure every meal is amazing, so whatever it is, it'll be something amazing. And it's so ironic, because it turned out that was her last meal, actually. And she kept telling me thank you and how good I was to her. That night on April 5th, she said that was her wedding anniversary. Her husband had died quite a long time ago, and I told her that she would see him again soon. And she told me, thank you for extending my life. She said that she wouldn't have had those extra days if it weren't for me. And I really don't know what she meant by that. Even now, I'm not sure what she meant by that, but I know that she believed it. And she said that she wished she could give me a hug, so I let her, and it's like the biggest hug we ever gave each other. And she just kept telling me thank you for being so good to her. So this story gets harder now. On April 6th, that was the next day. That's when she became unresponsive, and she stopped eating and drinking. Well, that morning she was drinking a lot, but then by the afternoon she was pretty much unconscious. Stopped talking and eating, but I prayed for her and laid hands on her and just asked God if anything could be done to please do it. And I didn't have much hope. My aunt felt the same way as me, that she wasn't just gonna suddenly wake up from this, and she didn't. But I wrote down that at 7:20 p.m. that night, I said, "Mom," and I didn't think she would answer because she hadn't been, but she said, "What?" And I said, "I love you." And again, I didn't think she would say anything more, but she said, "I love you too." And that was really special. And I thought that would be the last time, but at 9:30 p.m. I tried again, and I said, "Mom," and she said, "What?" And I said, "I love you," and she said, "I love you too, baby." And sorry, that was the last sentence she ever said. No. I just feel so special that it was to me, and I got to hear that one last time. That was a miracle too, because she had stopped talking, and just for her to say that was really amazing, and I'm really thankful for it. So then April 7th came, and they put her in the bed because she was just completely unresponsive. And then April 8th came. April 7th, all she said was, she said "what" once, but that was it. April 8th came and she didn't say anything, and April 7th, she started that death rattle. You know, that sound, if you've ever heard it, you'll never forget it. And there was a thunderstorm just raging outside that night with the wind and the thunder crashing, and I just thought it was so fitting with that death rattle and that fight to breathe, and I felt like it shouldn't have been a sunny day. I was glad that it was storming outside because it just seemed more fitting. I said, "I hope the sound doesn't haunt my dreams forever." Well, it still does. April 8th, then completely unconscious. I said, "It's probably dumb, but I just had to put lotion on her face. It might be the last thing I do for her. I hope it made her feel better somehow." She had this lotion she always liked to put on her face. She said her skin got dry. And that night, that was the night of the pink super full moon. I went out to look at it probably around 5:30 a.m. and it was just so beautiful. I even took pictures of it, and just looking out at that beautiful full moon. That wasn't the night of the storm, that was the next night. And I just thought to myself, I just know that she's gonna go under this full moon because it was so beautiful. I don't know why that was connected in my mind, but it just, I guess it seems symbolic of the beautiful place she was going, because her laying there dying was not a beautiful thing. It was the most sad thing I've ever seen, and it wasn't peaceful. There was nothing beautiful about it. And I wished that she would live forever, but I knew she wouldn't, and I knew there was no coming back, and I just didn't want her suffering like that anymore. And that night I they said she could still hear, so I got to talk to her a lot. I don't know if she really heard me or not, but I hope she did. And I'm really glad that I did that. I didn't know for sure that was going to be her last night, but it was. I came back in from looking at that full moon, and I texted with my aunt a few times. She wanted to know how she was doing. I told her she was, still the same. And then I finally texted that I was going to try to get a little bit more sleep, because soon the nurses and aides would be coming in and all that. So I laid on the couch here with my grandma in the bed just a few feet away. We had put the bed in the living room, and laid down and was trying to go back to sleep, and then I noticed that horrible sound of that death rattle stopped. And I just shot up really quick, and I looked at her, and, well, I won't go into the details. I guess that's a little too personal, but it did look like she was. I went over to her, and she took a few shallow, normal breaths, and put my hand on her shoulder, and I told her she wasn't alone, not to be afraid, that I was here. And it really looked like she got this look on her face, like she was, like a look of fear or sadness, and then it looked like she was trying to say something, and I was so excited because I thought she was going to say something, and now I think that look of sadness was because she wanted to say something and she couldn't. But well, that was the end then. There's no more to that story. She passed away. It was around 6:40 a.m. and the nurse came and declared her dead. But yeah, it's really hard. It's a brutal thing to go through, to lose a parent. But there was one more miracle. When we thought she was going to stay at the nursing home, I had kind of started the process and thinking about how I could get her apartment, and so I really wanted that. I felt like I really needed that, because it was going to be so traumatic for me to live 3 doors down and have to walk past this door every day and never be able to come in here again and know that someone else was living here. So this was going to be really unlikely to work out, because my family doctor, since she's not in mental health, she didn't really. First she said she wasn't going to do these papers because they were going to try to get it as a reasonable accommodation for my claustrophobia and panic attacks. And so I tried to find a psychiatrist, and oh my goodness, this was impossible during the pandemic. None of them were taking new patients, not even by telehealth. So I spent all day trying to do that, and I couldn't do that. But then it just so happened that I had a telehealth visit with my family doctor, and she changed her mind, and she said, oh sure, she would do it. So that was great. But then the leasing lady, she told me a few days later, she said that they never got the papers back from my doctor, and if they didn't get them real soon, they were going to have to give this apartment to the next person on the waiting list, and it can take up to 30 days to get approval for a reasonable accommodation. So this just really seemed like it wasn't going to work out. But every night that I was still allowed to come down here before the time expired that we weren't anymore, I came down here and I just prayed and begged God to let this be my home, because just so many memories here. And also, the night before she died, I told her that if I got this apartment, every year I wanted to have flowers on the balcony in her memory, and something she loved to do when she was able. She loved to plant flowers and have them sitting out here, and everyone commented just how beautiful it was. And it just, I really wanted this to work out. And also, she got this new floor. It's all linoleum, which is so much better for my allergies, and this is the only apartment with that floor. And I just prayed and prayed every night. I came down here and prayed for God to let this be my home, and everything was against me. All the odds were against me, but once again, God did the miracle, and He made it happen. And my move-in date was actually the 1-month anniversary of her death, that I got to come move into her place. And I'm just so thankful for how God showed me His love, because all of this stuff that I just desperately wanted and needed, it's all stuff that I couldn't have made happen, and He did. And He just made it happen like effortlessly, and I'm just so thankful. I never knew how loving God was and how much I could trust Him until I had to walk through this dark valley, and He walked with me. And I'm just so thankful. And even the moment she passed away, I always thought I would fall apart when that happened, but my first thought in that moment was I was happy for her not being in pain anymore. And I was happy for her instead of being sad for myself. And for a long time, that's what got me through. And it was only later the reality set in more, in the grief and the sadness, but God even helped me through that. I went through a severe depression where I just couldn't find joy in anything, and God has really healed me and helped me with that, because I do find joy in things now. I'm still sad, of course, and I still miss her, but I am able to enjoy things again now too, and to feel some hope. So this story is, the reason I tell her story is just to tell of all the miracles God did during this time, and just to share how you can trust God even when you're going through something so horrible, that you just put your trust in Him and pray and have faith. And He delivered for me. So that's my grandma's story, and that's my story too. And I just thank you so much for listening. I didn't mean for this to be so long, but I didn't want to leave anything out. I probably did anyway. But when you find yourself going through something horrific, just keep praying and trusting God, and He'll walk through you, and He'll help you with it, and His love will get you through it. Thanks so much for listening.